I can still remember vividly the river rock wall that outlined the outfield of the Little League baseball field in Coal City, Illinois, where our team met for a special postseason just for fun game the year I turned 13. Nothing else was special about that part except for the old rock wall that stood where many a cyclone fence marked the edge between a multiple base hit and the forever chased home run. As a second-year Little Leaguer, I played for the team sponsored by Azzarelli Construction. I was number 16 or something like that, which of course meant that I played left field and that I was chunky. The bigger the number, the bigger the waistline. The slower the player, the farther from the ball you played. Maybe it was because I was relaxed, or perhaps it was because I had learned from a coach and a teammate about my swing through positive encouragement that year, which really is just a way of saying that they told me how to put my weight into it. I will not forget the 8th inning. I usually got to the plate a couple times during a game. I'd already been up there a couple times that Saturday, and it was my last turn up at bat. I remember leaning back, holding my bat high, swinging with every ounce of my strength, and hearing the crack of a well-hit hard ball. I watched it fly through the air as I made my way to first base. I saw the center fielder chasing it, and I knew that it was going to clear the wall. And just as I began to round first base, I saw it touch down right on top of the wall and bounce back into the field, which made it a playable ball. Well, let's just say their center fielder wore number 5 or something like that, because he was fast. I ran as fast as my chubby legs would carry me, and I made it all the way to third base, my first and only triple of my entire Little League career, my almost home run. I was so proud of my hit that I never complained. I was probably so out of breath I couldn't complain about the unlucky bounce it took back into the field. I had hit a home run in my mind, and whether or not I got to stomp on home plate, I knew it. I knew it was a home run, out of the park. I was fortunate in my Little League experience to have a wonderful coach who cared as much about growing persons on his team as he did about the game, and certainly more than about the win-loss record we had. His goal was that we all had a chance to play, and that when we did, we had fun. He never yelled at us. And he didn't let our parents yell at us either. He praised our efforts at every turn and reminded us that every experience was one to grow on. One to grow on. Our team experience wasn't about being first or being the best or even winning first place. It was about playing a game. My experience of sports all through my life has been and continues to be about playing a game for enjoyment. Even when I sub for a pro at a golf outing, it's just about playing a game and having a little bit of fun. Not for a ribbon, not for a medal, not for a trophy or some kind of recognition. It must have been difficult for the team of disciples that Jesus had so hurriedly called together to understand as they walked from throng to throng, village to village, listened to the Master's teachings about denying oneself and bearing one's cross, and witnessed his hospitality for the despised and the desperate alike. It must have been difficult to understand the nature of the miracle worker who kept reminding them that he was going to suffer and die when it would seem that he should have the power to prevent it. It must have been difficult for them to understand, because Mark's gospel tells us that when Jesus told them the Son of Man, or the human one, is to be betrayed into human hands, and they will kill him, and 3 days after being killed he will rise again, says they didn't understand what he was saying, and they were afraid to ask him. They were afraid to ask him. You see, in the first century, not unlike us, they were not accustomed to people with fantastic abilities predicting their own cruel deaths, denying themselves fame and fortune, and even bending to serve the lowliest of the lowly. They had a hard time accepting that their friend, their master and leader, could be handed over to the hands of the authorities whose power seemed to pale in comparison to that which he held, for condemnation and even death. Why, he was the greatest and most powerful human being they had ever seen. Surely, if he could raise a little girl from the dead, restore sight to the blind, and speech to a person who was mute, if he could feed thousands from meager rations and cast out demons from the possessed, surely then he was more powerful than army-clad soldiers. And he was growing more popular every day. Everyone wanted to touch him. Everyone wanted to see him, to hear his teachings, to have hope and life again in him. How could someone with all this greatness be handed over for death? A humiliating death, reserved for the most vile, the most despised and hated criminals, death on a cross. For the disciples, who themselves were becoming rather famous, the thought of their source of advantage being destroyed was perhaps too much against their sensibilities to understand. They were following a hero, after all, and they were becoming heroes themselves. And they were beginning to feel very good about it. Very good about it. I wonder sometimes if this isn't part of the phenomenon that happens around some television preachers, for instance, or those pastors of huge megachurch movements. If people feel like they're following a hero and then they feel like they are heroes themselves a bit. I'm associated with this leader. This is my guy or my gal. This is the person I follow. You know, I've met them. I've shaken their hands and they drop their names. Yeah, I go to their church. Right? But for the second time, on the road to Capernaum, Jesus continued to nag them with his prediction of his death. Brushing off his teaching about his suffering and death, they talked among themselves along the way, afraid to confront their hero about their misgivings. Mark tells us that when they had arrived at Capernaum, they entered a house, perhaps for privacy from the crowds that now followed him everywhere. And Jesus inquired about their conversation along the way. And their response, as before, is silence, probably with the look of the student who says with her eyes, "We weren't talking about anything," after she's been caught in a giggle. And so, being the great rabbi or teacher that Jesus was, he did what all great teachers with authority of his time did. He sat down. Then he called the 12 and he taught them about true greatness. He sat down not because he was just tired from the walk or even because he was tired of his blundering group of followers not getting it. He sat down because what he was about to say was and is very important instructions for following him. Mark says that Jesus said to them, "Whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all." At this moment, the heads of the 12 must have dropped at least an inch apiece. They had been had. He knew what they were talking about all along. And once again, they were missing the point of following him. You see, even after having just messed up an exorcism, They had the gall to be arguing over who was the greatest among them, as if they were in the dugout at a Little League baseball game. After having witnessed Jesus reaching out to the outcast, they were placing themselves on top of the world as if they had just been awarded a medal for being one of his closest friends. What Jesus did next could be the topic of a whole other sermon. The writer says that Jesus took a child and put it among them. And taking it in his arms, he said to them, "Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me welcomes not me, but the one who sent me." On the surface, his action, or this action, for our contemporary romantic and often celebrated view of childhood, doesn't pack the powerful punch that it did then. The child, you see, was the clearest example that Jesus could use of the lowliest in the world. Children in the first century were not held in esteem. They were nothing, nobodies, basically useless eaters, without rights, without protections or positive support systems. They were underfoot, in the way, should be kept silent so as not to bother the really important members of the society, the men. The men. When Jesus reached out and took the little child and put it in their midst and took it in his arms, he said with his actions, "See, here is what I mean by being servant of all. See, here is the way to true greatness. See, here is your calling to lift up the lowliest, to reach out to all of God's children. See, here is how you follow me and thus serve God who creates and redeems you with amazing grace." It's hard for us to understand the significance of this event in our contemporary worldview. And it's hard for us to truly accept the meaning of it as well. We're socialized from very young children to be competitors, to be all that we can be and more. Individual ambition is celebrated. We strive for economic and personal accomplishments. We reach for our claim to the 15-minute spotlight. We climb to reach the highest points of our potential as we seek acceptance of ourselves. And we look down upon those who just can't seem to get as high as we can. We thrive on success and run with fear from failure. We honor achievement and we denounce the low achiever. We recognize humility and pity the ignorance of the humble. We seek life and we serve death instead. We say yes to Jesus' call to follow, and we argue over whose power is most powerful along the way. We agree to carry our cross, and instead we pin it to the lapel of our suit of status. Christ calls us to a better way of life that is not based on getting to the top, only to keep falling or to be knocked off when we get there by someone else. Christ calls us to the best ambition in life, one that is lived in humble service of one another. No personal glory, no fame, perhaps no fortune, no special recognition in heaven, no trophy or medal, just hospitality, unconditional acceptance, and love. The life that Jesus modeled for us is one in which we truly live free from the haunting need for the acceptance of others, free from the nagging pressure to impress ourselves or others or even God, who, by the way, was impressed by you at your birth, is impressed by you right now, and will always be impressed by you as one of God's own beloved children. Jesus calls us away from the need to see ourselves above others or as compared to others. You see, in Christ there are no medal winners, there are no failures, there are no home run hitters, and there are no strikeouts. In Christ there are no millionaires, there are no homeless, there are no winners, and there are no losers. There are no first world people, there are no elevated members of the body. There are just members of the body, all needed, all useful, all served, all celebrated, all loved. All loved. The way that Jesus walked for us was one with no boundaries. No metal tally boards, no 3-level platforms, no personal glory. The way that Jesus walked for us and calls us to follow him on was one that led to sacrifice, to service, to humility, and salvation. All of it, not for our glory, but for the glory of God. All of it, not for our glory, but for the glory of God. And that's the best ambition in life. Amen.